Everything seems to die when it gets close to Wright-Patterson. Supernatural or unexplained cases, stories like Roswell, Hangar 18, Project Blue Book, evidence, footage, explanations, witnesses, first-hand accounts, conspiracies, documented facts, even the strange anomalies that surface around the world seem to suffer the same fate. When we put together the case on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we came across every kind of controversial theory surrounding it, and we realized that many of them are rooted in real records, documented witnesses, and evidence that, unfortunately, tends to vanish over time or shift into a completely different version in ways that can only be described as desperate. Many of these stories begin with lights in the sky and non-human bodies, genuine encounters with the supernatural, forbidden technology, UFOs, UAPs, and some even claim to document contact with extraterrestrial life, but every single one of them ends the same way. Absolute silence, convenient official explanations, and disappearances. But what do you actually believe? Because here at Haunted Archives, used to investigating this parallel reality that embraces the supernatural, the conspiratorial, the mysterious, and the hidden, we find it very hard to believe that truths declared with such force can simply vanish or be rewritten overnight. As history has shown us time and time again, it looks a lot more like a cover-up, followed by a deliberate burning of the record. And that is exactly why we have to ask, what if Wright-Patterson is not holding files, but the buried corpses of truths the American government has never been able to explain? What would happen if even one of those truths were ever uncovered? Now, put the kids to bed, sit back on the couch, and turn off the lights, because what comes next is heavy, controversial, and may deeply shake whatever idea of a perfect world you have managed to hold on to until today. Forget everything you think you know about the most disturbing records in America and the world. Forget Roswell and forget Area 51 as though it were the most important, horrifying, classified, and secretive place in the American government when it comes to things that were never supposed to exist. Because Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is real. It sits in Ohio, in the United States, belongs to the United States Air Force, and is connected to aerospace research, technical intelligence, engineering, logistics, and military development. We are no longer talking about a base invented by obscure internet forums, but a real, official, powerful structure directly tied to the American government. The real horror of this base comes from what, according to decades of accounts, theories, witnesses, and controversial files, was allegedly brought inside it, and because of that, for many people, it became known as the funeral arm of Area 51, the Black Coffin of America. And in case you are not familiar with Hangar 18, consider this a warning. If you are easily disturbed, too skeptical, too sensitive, or feel that certain subjects can shift your emotional state, this may be the moment to leave the video and go back to browsing YouTube as though the world were still a simple place. Because we are going to explore cases that go far beyond the Roswell file, the classic UFO accounts, and the official projects the public keeps repeating today. We are also not talking about a haunted house, an empty road, or a forest somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, where people disappear and become legend over the years. And this is not a missing 411 case. Here, the layers of real facts, accounts, and suspicions surrounding Wright-Patterson speak of wreckage, bodies, lost technologies, classified programs, underground rooms, supernatural anomalies, extraterrestrial intelligences, and contacts that may never have been purely technological. And at the center of that shadow stands an almost unknown mythical structure called Hangar 18, or the Black Coffin. If these technologies, contacts, or facts could have changed the lives of people across the entire world, why were they never handed over to brilliant scientists, universities, independent researchers, or a scientific community capable of reshaping human quality of life? And why did they instead vanish, get locked away, or perhaps get sent somewhere even worse? Maybe everything brought into the mysterious Hangar 18 was never meant to be hidden, but to be owned. Not to free humanity, but so that an elite could study, develop, learn, and decide when, where, how, and whether any of that information would ever be revealed, used, erased, or converted into power. If you still consider cases like Roswell to be the most important events, you may have fallen exactly into the narrative they wanted you to follow. While today you look up at the sky and wonder if life exists beyond Earth, maybe you should be looking at the place where they bury the secrets and asking yourself something else entirely. What if everything that gets released and made public only exists to keep people debating extraterrestrial life, while in a windowless room somewhere, someone is analyzing what remained from those events and asking questions that are far less innocent? How can we use this? How does this serve our interests? How can this expand control, dominance, and power without anyone noticing? Think about it. The greatest mystery has always been what they did with it afterward, and which parts of that knowledge were buried so the world could keep functioning exactly as it does, or keep being controlled without ever realizing it. And if you think you only know Roswell, maybe it is time to remember the official programs created to investigate aerial phenomena, like Project Blue Book, and also names from the world of conspiracy culture, like HARP, Project Blue Beam, particle accelerators, underground bases, classified experiments, and technologies that seem far too significant to be dismissed as mere rumors. If you believe this might be just another conspiracy taking shape, think a little harder. Not even the most gifted fantasy writer could fabricate certain isolated facts spread across time that connect to each other the way they do when you lay them all out on the same table, which is exactly what we are about to do. We are talking about genetic manipulation, contact with spiritual entities, reverse engineering, derived technologies, modified materials, human experimentation, viruses, diseases, potential cures, attempts to communicate with non-human intelligences, and perhaps even efforts to reopen a door that should have remained closed since the very first contact. Because when a civilization encounters something it does not understand, it can do one of two things. It can fear it, or it can try to control it. And if there is one thing the history of power has taught us, it is that governments rarely choose only to fear. They study, they copy, they lock away, they deny, they rebrand, they turn the impossible into a classified project and then bury the rest. And perhaps one of the most concrete pieces of evidence for that is the case of Robert Spencer Carr. This is one of the most disturbing names connected to Hangar 18, and it surfaces in 1974 when Robert Spencer Carr, an American researcher and ufologist, decided to say something publicly that was far too specific to be dismissed as a simple rumor. According to him, Wright-Patterson was concealing several deeply unsettling things, among them 2 flying discs and 12 non-human bodies. He was not just anyone, but a well-known and respected researcher in his field. And what began circulating after those declarations was that the bodies were connected to the old nightmare of Roswell. But the most important detail was located in Ohio, inside Hangar 18, a strange and almost unknown facility within the Wright-Patterson military base itself. Carr claimed his information came from a reliable high-ranking military source, someone who had seen more than they should have, or heard things inside that structure that could never reach the public in any clean and official form. And that is the part that makes everything more uncomfortable, because fabricated stories tend to fall apart when they get too close to the details. But this one did not disappear. It spread. The accusation was simple, direct, and brutal. Alien bodies were being kept at Wright-Patterson, and alongside them, materials that belonged to no publicly recognized technology. That was the first time the Black Coffin of America took on a physical image. A cold room, a sealed door, a metal table, and 12 bodies that officially never existed. And then, as always, the Air Force denied everything completely, including even the existence of the now mysterious hangar. But how does a poorly supported and supposedly ridiculous story survive for decades? How did this name travel through books, interviews, films, television programs, forums, researcher archives, and whispered military conversations as though it were a password? Why did a name with no official existence keep feeling so real to so many people? Think carefully about what that means. If Carr were wrong, then we have nothing more than another entry in UFO culture, another exaggeration fed by Cold War fear, by Roswell, by military bases, and by humanity's obsession with extraterrestrial life. But if he were right, would this entire complex not be a morgue for impossible truths? This is exactly where the psychological horror starts to click into place. If these were witnesses to abuse cases, crimes, or major scandals like the ones we see playing out in the media today, would we not treat all of it with greater respect, doubt, and attention, investigating with far more willingness and seriousness? So why were we trained to laugh and label as lunatics everyone who came forward with accounts of UFOs, UAPs, and encounters with extraterrestrial life? Would it not be reasonable to question whether any of it could be real? And if it were true, who would benefit from suppressing it and turning the whole subject into an exaggerated joke told by a raving lunatic? Who would be protected when witnesses were discredited and dismissed as unstable? Who would benefit if everything stayed hidden, knowing that information is real power? Maybe that is the most effective trick of all. turning a serious accusation into a punchline, a potential historical crime into pop culture, and the place where bodies might actually be stored into a joke for teenagers, curious tourists, and weekend conspiracy fans. But Robert wasn't the last famous name to get involved in this controversy. Barry Goldwater was an American senator, former presidential candidate, a pilot during World War II, and a major general in the Air Force Reserve. On March 28, 1975, Goldwater wrote a letter to Shlomo Arnon stating that the subject of UFOs had interested him for quite some time, and that roughly 10 years earlier he had been sharply reprimanded for it, with his request denied on the grounds that the material was classified above top secret. Years later, in an interview published by The New Yorker in 1988, Goldwater shared an even heavier version of the story. He said he had asked General Curtis LeMay about the existence of a room inside Wright-Patterson that, according to rumors, was connected to UFO materials, recovered discs, and possibly the Blue Room itself. LeMay's response was short, aggressive, and absolute. Goldwater was told never to bring it up again, and that was not a polite warning or a bureaucratic explanation. It was the kind of response that turns a closed door into a silent threat. Later, in 1994, on Larry King Live, Goldwater retold the story on national television. He did not confirm having seen any evidence, nor did he name his sources or explain how he had come to know what he knew, but he confirmed that he had tried to get close to the rumors surrounding Wright-Patterson, and that even with his name, his prestige, his military record, and his political influence, he was shut out in a way that left no room for interpretation. An American senator with a military background and access to the inner circles of government, admitting he tried to find out what was inside Wright-Patterson and was told no. If someone of that rank could not get through that door, who exactly would have access to that kind of material? If the Blue Room were nothing more than a rumor, how did someone like Barry Goldwater become genuinely interested in what was inside it? If Hangar 18 were pure fantasy, why would that request have provoked such an aggressive response from Curtis LeMay? And if nothing existed beyond ordinary files, why would Goldwater himself say the material remained classified above top secret? The Goldwater case proves absolutely nothing on its own, but like every other case before it, it shows that something was being concealed and that those doors appeared to be sealed even to people who were part of the system itself. Carr placed the bodies inside the base. Goldwater placed the locked door in front of the public. And when a story involving crafts, discs, bodies, restricted rooms, and military secrets begins to be treated as reality by researchers, senators, and generals, it no longer belongs to the world of legend or rumor. It becomes a series of real events that happen to prominent figures at the very center of American life. Before we go any further, we need to understand that none of what we have seen so far was part of the creation of the mysterious Hangar 18, because everything up to this point was only part of the process that helped bring it into public awareness. And as for how it was actually created, the reality may be far darker than it appears. Between 1947 and 1969, the Air Force investigated thousands of UFO-related reports, and to do that, it maintained an official program called Project Blue Book, created specifically to investigate sightings of unidentified flying objects. It was headquartered at Wright-Patterson, analyzed 12,618 cases, and after years of operating at full capacity, left 701 of them officially classified as unidentified in the government record. 701 stories that passed through pilots, civilians, radar operators, military personnel, witnesses, files, technicians, and officers, and still received no definitive explanation. And we are not talking about a rumor, a myth, or an obscure internet forum, but a number buried inside this official history. The Project Blue Book was connected to earlier programs like Project Sign and Project Grudge, and also to J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who served as its scientific consultant. While Hynek began as a skeptic, over time he declared that certain cases genuinely deserved serious investigation, especially after stating that they had begun restricting what he himself was allowed to officially document inside the program's records. Perhaps the most disturbing controversy emerged in 1953 with a CIA-organized group known as the Robertson Panel, assembled to assess the broader impact of UFO reports. The most unsettling warning tied to that panel was not simply to study the phenomenon, but to reduce public interest, educate the population to be less impressed by such reports, and use media, education, and public figures to diminish the social weight of the subject and, where possible, completely discredit the witnesses. At that point, Project Blue Book stops looking like just an investigation and starts looking like a machine built for classification, exhaustion, and burial. A report would enter the system as a terror account, an impossible light, a pursuit in the sky, a maneuver with no explanation, or an encounter with something that obeyed no known rules, and then leave the other side labeled as a perception error, an airplane, a balloon, a star, mass hysteria, confusion, or a closed case. In 1966, Hynek became even more widely known for a particularly ridiculous explanation tied to the lights reported over Michigan, which were publicly attributed to swamp gas. That phrase became a joke almost immediately, but it also became a perfect example of how anything could be suppressed, ridiculed, and made small enough to disappear. 3 years later, on December 17, 1969, the Secretary of the Air Force announced the closure of Project Blue Book with the official justification stating that no threat to national security had been found and no evidence of extraterrestrial technology had been identified. In other words, nothing remained that could justify the program's continued cost. According to official sources, all files were preserved, all numbers were recorded, the unidentified cases remained documented, and the base continued building its reputation as the Black Coffin of America. If you think the infamous Project Blue Book proves nothing, think again, because it may be the greatest proof that for decades, the American government received enough reports to build programs, panels, reports, consultants, files, and an entire structure around phenomena it claimed not to consider important. And if there was truly nothing there, why investigate for so long? In the middle of so many cases, one in particular stood out, both for the account itself and for the fate attributed to the soldier involved. In the early hours of January 18, 1978, somewhere between Fort Dix and McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, one of the most disturbing military accounts ever connected to the name Wright-Patterson allegedly took place. According to the informant source, operators linked to the base detected a strange contact while an unusual light appeared near the military perimeter, and shortly after, a patrol was reportedly sent to check the area. That is where events spiraled completely out of control. What they found was not just a light in the sky or an object vanishing from radar, because some accounts describe a small entity with a large head, dark eyes, unusual skin, and an almost reptilian appearance, along with a strong smell of ammonia and sulfur, as though whatever it was belonged to no known biological pattern. The darkest version of the story says that a military police officer fired at the creature as it attempted to escape toward an object near the fence, and that the body fell in an area connected to McGuire, triggering a rapid, silent, and fully military-controlled response. The most frequently cited name in this story is George Filer, a retired Air Force major who claimed to have received the official report on the incident that same night and was later made responsible for gathering the information and writing a command report. While another name that surfaces is Jeff Morse, identified as someone who allegedly participated in the recovery of the body. There is also talk of blocked photographs, revoked access, internal reports, and even a military form referenced as DD Form 1569, connected to the logging of unusual incidents. But the most important detail for us right now is that the body was not kept in New Jersey. It was allegedly placed aboard a Lockheed C-141 Starlifter under armed escort and sent to Wright-Patterson, logged as military cargo bound for the installation known as Hangar 18. McGuire and Fort Dix deserve their own file because the story is too large, too deeply military, and too disturbing to fit entirely inside this documentary. But for the purposes of this video, one thing is enough to understand. If Roswell was the first great symbolic package, McGuire and Fort Dix may be the most frightening repetition of that same pattern. Something appears. A military perimeter is activated. An entity is described. A body is removed. And once again, the name of the final destination seals the fate of the case. If this is nothing more than a story, it is one of the most precisely constructed military accounts in modern history, given the volume of specific details cited across each of the separate reports, which align with an unsettling level of consistency when laid out together on the same table, especially considering the names involved and the credibility of those who brought the case forward. After the bodies cited by Robert Spencer Carr, the door denied to Barry Goldwater, the files buried by Project Blue Book, and the alleged body removed from McGuire, an even more serious accusation came forward, this time from a colonel in the United States Army. And it suggested that everything that fell into the hands of the government and the military was never simply hidden, but used. In 1997, Colonel Philip J. Corso published The Day After Roswell, claiming that materials recovered from a non-human origin had been quietly distributed to companies, laboratories, and military programs without their true origin ever being disclosed to the public. According to Corso, all of that material became study, research, development, and technological advantage. And among the technologies associated with his claims are integrated circuits, fiber optics, lasers, night vision, and high-resistance materials. Knowing that Wright-Patterson has always been tied to technical aerospace and military research, how is it still possible to dismiss this reality? The base was never just a storage facility, but all along, a large-scale advanced research laboratory, a structure capable of capturing everything, analyzing it, cataloging it, and converting sensitive technology into programs, contracts, invisible patents, or future weapons. This is the point where the Foreign Technology Division comes back into focus. A division connected to the study of captured or unknown technologies, and if we think about that more carefully, the question shifts even further. If something was not Russian, Chinese, or American, if it belonged to no nation on Earth, could that have been the true meaning of foreign technology? Corso's book was criticized, challenged, and dismissed by many as absurd, but the accusation he placed on the table never went away, because the secret was no longer just the existence of extraterrestrial life, but the silent use of everything collected from these cases. We are talking about discoveries capable of reshaping communication, energy, medicine, transportation, defense, and military power, all of it buried far from public knowledge, while appearing gradually in the world as though it were nothing more than natural progress. Now, do you understand why we were taught to laugh at the word UFO? We laughed at the flying saucers, the witnesses, the bodies, and the hangars. We laughed at the men who said they had seen something impossible inside military bases. And when we started to stop laughing, they simply decided it was easier to change the label. UFO became UAP. Flying saucer became unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And what had previously been treated as the delusion of a madman came back to the center of the Pentagon. The Navy, military pilots, sensors, official footage, and hearings before the United States Congress. In 2017, the world found out that the Pentagon had been running a program connected to the investigation of anomalous aerial phenomena known as ATIP. And one of the names most associated with that new phase was Luis Elizondo, a former official connected to the Department of Defense, who helped push the subject back into the press, into public debate, and into the heart of the institutions themselves. Then the videos surfaced. On April 27, 2020, the Department of Defense authorized the release of 3 United States Navy videos known as Flyer, Go Fast, and Gimbal. One of them dated back to November 2004, and the other 2 to January 2015. And while the government stopped short of calling them extraterrestrial, it declared that the Navy videos were real and showed unidentified objects. The most disturbing case of this new phase was what became known as the Tic Tac UFO encounter. In 2004, pilots connected to the USS Nimitz and the USS Princeton were dispatched to investigate something in the sky after radar operators had been tracking strange contacts in the area, and among those pilots was David Fravor, a Navy commander who was trained, experienced, and far from the kind of witness that could be easily dismissed. Fravor described a white, elongated object with no wings, no windows, no rotors, and no visible sign of propulsion. An object that seemed to defy everything known about how any machine should move. One that descended, climbed, accelerated, reacted to the presence of the fighter jets, and disappeared in a way that matched no airplane, drone, missile, or common technology. Years later, on July 26, 2023, David Fravor sat before the United States Congress to speak about exactly that, and the same kind of subject that for decades had destroyed reputations, become a television punchline, and been filed away under lunatic territory, was now being discussed by lawmakers, military personnel, and official witnesses in full public view. In November 13, 2024, another public house hearing titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, Exposing the Truth kept the subject alive, now framed as a matter of transparency, national security, technology, classified information, and institutional control. That makes one thing clear: the government confirms part of the story, and yet the final answer never arrives in full. How are we supposed to believe that an institution that spent decades destroying real information and evidence about all of this would now be willing to officially admit certain things? And thinking about it that way, the question shifts just slightly. How are we supposed to believe they are telling us the whole truth now and not simply building another narrative to keep us under control one more time? For us here at Haunted Archives, what is most frightening is the realization that today, the horror is no longer about imagining bodies on metal tables, windowless rooms, or hidden hangars. The horror now lives inside military sensors, partially released footage, digital files, artificial intelligence, surveillance systems, drones, classified programs, databases, incomplete reports, and systems capable of erasing a truth before it ever reaches the public. It is time to understand that the days of worrying only about bodies inside bases are behind us, because what concerns us today may be hidden inside servers, contracts, acronyms, access clearances, and reports that no one outside the system can ever read in full. And if there is any truth at the center of Carr, Goldwater, Blue Book, McGuire, Corso, UAPs, Pentagon footage, and congressional hearings, then the final question is not whether the black coffin exists. The question now is, what is still breathing inside it? If you have accounts, documents, military memories, or forbidden stories connected to Wright-Patterson, Hangar 18, McGuire, Roswell, or any base where the impossible was buried, send them to Haunted Archives, because maybe the next file is already with you. And if you think our investigation ends here, come with me to the next video.